Welcome to Martinis, Girls and Guns. My name's Sean, and I just thought today it'd be interesting to kind of go through my camera history. Not really because I have to, but it's important for this channel that I kind of go through my camera history, because what I find important or what I find helpful is that if you know where someone's coming from or what they do or what they prefer, you know what bits of advice to take and what bits of advice to ignore. So with that being said, let's kind of go through a bit of history here with this. So for starters, before I even got into cinema cameras, my love for cameras started with this. Before I even started out, touched the cinema camera, the first camera I ever held was my grandmother's Leica M2. That's where my love of images began, quite deliberate and analog. So if you look at the first video on this channel, it's a cartoon of yours truly holding a Leica. And I've got that same Leica here. This thing is, I can't tell how old it is. I thought it was my mom's, but when I learned the history of Leicas, it's my nan's. But yeah, same Leica that I took my first photos on. I refuse to resurface it because, you know, it's wearing its history on its body. So this is where it all started. Kind of from there, I learned to shoot film, well, motion picture film. I dabbled with 8mm, but really film school Tish is where I really got my hands wet, as you call it, with 16mm film in the Bolex and then 16mm in the RESR3. What was important about kind of learning to shoot motion picture on film is it taught me discipline, right? Because film's expensive, and it also taught me things like shooting ratio. That's something that a lot of people who started out with their first cameras being digital do not know. You had shooting ratios 3:1, which means that when I was working on like my thesis or my set and sound projects, it's 3:1, right? I was militant about that. 3 takes, one of them ones got to get used because you're just not going to keep burning film. From there, we move on to kind of the digital era. So my first, not the first one I owned, but kind of the first digital camera that proper like professional digital camera that I got hands on was the Panasonic DVX100 24p 1/3 inch CCDs. That was quite the era. Started shooting on the DVX, but I really hated capturing tape, because capturing tape was 1:1. If you shot 60 minutes, you took 60 minutes to capture. It was long. So it moved on a bit later after the DVX. Pana dropped HVX200. That was my first camera saved up. An HVX200 and an 8GB P2. If you're shooting now, you can't even understand what 8GB media was. That was the biggest cards you could get, an 8GB P2. So shooting an HVX200, 8GB P2, and then right around when I was doing kind of my final projects in school, the Mini 35, German company named PS Technique, had the first one. It was ground glass thing, went on the front of the camera, and you could use real still photo lenses, 35mm lenses. PS Technique had the first one, then Letters made one, and then Red Rock Micro, I don't even know if them lot are still around. Red Rock Micro had one, but I rented mine from Dual Camera in New York City, and that's where I shot my actual like final project on. Around this time as well is when Panasonic had the AJ-HDC 27H. That was a popular Varicam at the time. It had variable frame rate, and for me, that was like the Porsche on the wall. You know what I mean? It was like, wow, you got a digital camera, it's gonna be Varicam. Because at that time, films were still being shot on film, and you know what I mean, digital was kind of like the indie thing. Fast forward after that, then came the Red One. Moment of silence. Yeah, the Red One. What can I say about that camera that's not been said about a Warzone? Don't have any good memories of the Red One. I bought a Red One early, buying into the revolution, but instead what I got was headache, crashes, overheating, and a camera that did not work about 80% of the time. No offense, Red, you lot have come a long way, but the Red One for me was a tragedy. And here's why I had a beef with Red for bare long, because I bought a Red One, I think it was $17,000 or $18,000, and I'll never forget this because it's a beef that I still got. You paid for the camera via wire, and so I never kept the camera. I actually sent it back because it was so much of a nuisance. So when Red refunded my money, they deducted the wire fee, so my refund was short $75. Even though I've owned about 4 Reds in my life, I still remember what you lot did to me when I returned my Red 1. A funny story about the Red 1 was that I actually got it to shoot a short, and it was so terrible that I sent it back and got my money back. I bought a Panasonic HMC 150. So it was an AVC HD camera. I actually shot a short Jasmine with the HMC 150 and it worked like a charm. 3 CCDs, 1/3 inch. I didn't even bother with the Mini 35 adapter, just shot the short straight guerrilla style on it. Great times. HMC 150, actually, I think that camera is in the Hall of Fame because that's a camera that paid for itself about 10 times over. After the HMC 150, I hopped abroad, and that's the advent of the Sony EXs. I was doing a lot of broadcast work at the time, and the Sony EX1 and EX3, those had the distinction of being the first cameras that could do both 50 and 60 hertz. So most people will not remember or might not know, there was a time where if you bought a camera, you had to decide what frequency it was. It was either 50 or 60 hertz. And then Sony with the EXs, if my memory serves me right, at least according to my memory, which is what we're dealing with here, was the first time you could go PAL and NTSC in the same camera body, just flip it. So I did a lot of shooting in England and in the US, and actually I lived in Jamaica 4 years shooting with those cameras. So when I got back to the States, I realized the world had changed. This was the DSLR revolution. Sad times. I ruined a lot of things. That was like the M-box of indie filmmaking. Nothing got better after that. Moment of silence for that. Day rates had gone down the drain. Everyone was shooting wide open on a nifty 50 with super dodgy autofocus. Clients started using the word cinematic to describe God knows what. No one knew what they meant, but oh, I needed to look cinematic. And what I think most people in that era translated that to mean was 50mm 1.8 wide open with a variable neutral density filter. It was terrible. That also was a time where lenses changed. So on the Mini 35 digitals, everyone was shooting with Nikon lenses because Nikon lenses allowed you to, basically Nikon lenses were fully manual. And so you didn't need anything electronic, and the flange focal distance on Nikon was longer, so you could use a Nikon lens on a Canon and you could use a Nikon lens on a Mini 35 digital adapters, whether it was the PS Technique, whether it was the Lettuce or the Red Rock. But when the Canon thing came around with the 5D, everyone kind of dropped their Nikon lenses and went to using Canon lenses, which is how we got to where we are now. As a result of this, everyone started looking at doing large sensor cameras. That's when my next thing comes into play, the Panasonic AF100. The AF100 was a micro four thirds kind of digital cinema camera from Panasonic. This is also around the time, not sure if my timeline's correct, this is around the time where the Panasonic GH2 came out, and for someone like me who would always fancied anamorphic, we could hack the GH2 for better codecs, you know, better workflow overall. Actually, it outperformed the Canon 5D at the time. And for me, the GH had better color than the Canons, better codecs, and less rolling shutter artifact. No moire. That camera was a legend in its time. While I was bumming around with the AF100 and the GH, Sony dropped the F3. The F3 had a bit of decent adoption. It was competing at the time with the Canon C300. Canon had decided to mature and drop the initial C300, and the F3 was kind of competing with it. So I had the AF100 at the time, and I loved the AF100, shot more with the AF100. Later on, with the Canon C300, Sony then dropped the F5 and 55, and this is what I learned from those two cameras being out. I ended up buying an F5. I realized that people don't care what a better camera is, because the F5 at the time was a much better camera than the Canon C300. But because somehow people were accustomed to the 5D color science or whatever it was the 5D had that they loved, people jumped to the Canon. Apples and oranges, or apples to apples comparison, F5 was a much better camera, but didn't really pick up because people just kind of gravitated from the 5D to the C300. The best camera it's not always what people are looking for. A lot of times they're just looking for someone to confirm, or some product to confirm their bias. So around this time, there was a little Chinese company I was reading about called Kinefinity, and they had something called the Kine Raw Mini. So I went NAB that year and I bumped into the owner, Jiwa, and I actually bought a Kine Raw Mini, which was a camera that shot cinema DNG RAW, and interestingly enough, seemed to mimic the RE color science quite closely. And over time, I believe I've owned almost every single Kinefinity camera. Currently have a Mavo Edge 6K, but that was kind of like my personal tinkering camera, because much like the GH series, which I continue to own, the Kinefinities offered you the ability to shoot RAW and shoot anamorphic. We're gonna fast forward. After the F5, I went to an F55 because I was shooting a project that ended up actually being, I believe, Netflix's first true 4K acquired documentary. It was a car project. So in 2016, Panasonic released the VariCam LT. And once they released that, I was like, you know what? It's like you grow up and you finally get to buy the Porsche that was on your wall. It wasn't the same model VariCam that I longed for back in film school, but it was a VariCam, and in my experience shooting in 35, it had everything that I needed. So got rid of everything except for my F55, which I hung on to specifically for global shutter, because CMOS is, rolling shutter is, we'll leave it at that. So the LT became my main camera from that period. So fast forward about a year and a half into the LT, Pana announces the Panasonic EVA-1. As soon as the EVA-1 was announced, we all breathed a sigh of relief, because if the camera was any good, we could end up with a half decent gimbal cam. So it turned out to actually be a very good camera. So on the Netflix show we were on, we switched to using the EVA-1 on gimbals. So I bought two EVA-1s, had one of them modified to PL mount, wooden camera. Ryan Shawman was still at wooden camera at the time. That's why I got two EVA bodies, one in PL and one in EF, just because the modification was too much of a hassle to go back and forth. So I was like, you know what, made sense to just buy two, keep one in PL and one in EF. And Panasonic was on a roll here. So a little while later, they released the S1, which was interesting because they got into the alliance with Leica. Obviously, if I've got a bias to any camera brand, it's definitely Leica since birth. But Leica had the CL, so the L mount used to be called the CL mount because they had a sexy little Super 35 camera that had that mount. I'm not sure how long, but it was out for quite a long time. Like, I had a project coming up and I was really about to jump into an S1, and I believe Matt said, nah, just wait. You know, they knew me, or I'd known Panasonic from doing all the stuff with the GH cameras. So they said, you know what, wait. And then they announced the S1H, which till this day is still a camera that I shoot on, and it's actually 100% my favorite hybrid. I do these videos on either the Fuji X100V or the S5 2X. Right now I'm shooting on S5 2X, but the S1H is 100% my favorite. I know they just announced the S1 Mark II, and my problem with that is it does not have an OLPF filter and it does not have proper time code. So on the S1H and a few of the GH cameras, they've got a flash sync port that you could put in a little cable and gives you a proper BNC port. So you can actually record LTC time code as opposed to having to record audio timecode like I'm doing now on the S5X and then convert it. It's just a better workflow. So I've been on shoots that's been 3 EVA-1s and a VariCam and an S1H that we drop into somewhere as a crash cam. I shot Revolver with all of the Panasonic cameras, basically my EVA-1s, my VariCam and a GH, and just let them go, let the audio guy do his thing. Till this day, the S1H, between the image quality and just the ability to I can't overstate the importance of real time code. I know they're adding the Bluetooth time code thing, but if you're doing fights at Wembley or fights at the Staples Center, you can't really rely on Bluetooth time code in them situations. So for years, my setup was solid. VariCam LT plus EVA-1 plus Lumix bodies, GH and S series bodies. Obviously, I do a lot of broadcast and a lot of corporate work, and in that space, you know, the FX cameras. So I bought an FX9 for compatibility and to do that sort of work. But whenever I need to do something with a bit of sex appeal, and whenever I want to shoot anything that I'm coloring myself, my default is always the Panasonics, which is why they're my favorite. So I also shot my proof of concept film Revolver, the trailer's on the channel, all on the Varicam, the EVA, and the Lumix S series cameras. So after Revolver, I decided I needed a high-res, full-frame DCI anamorphic camera. Not really because I needed the full frame, but I needed the height of the sensors so that I could shoot 2x anamorphic and deliver in proper DCI 4K anamorphic spec. So that's kind of where I landed on the Mavo Edge 6K. So I picked that up, and it's a great camera. I still have it, and it's actually a great platform for me to experiment on. But when I started thinking about doing a mid-budget or, you know, low-budget film with a professional crew, started to wonder if the camera is really ready for prime time, and decided it's not something I want to risk. While it's great for personal projects and proof of concepts and that, I didn't know if it was really set ready. But it does check off all the boxes, most of the boxes that I need, especially color science and the anamorphic and high frame rate. But set readiness I'm kind of on the fence about. That's what sent me back out to the marketplace, and I was fortunate enough to kind of shoot a couple of projects on the Venice. I shot on about 4 projects on the Venice 1, and while shooting on the Venice 1, I was looking for something that would wow me, right? Because my baseline was my Varicam, is my Varicam LT, so it was like, everyone's hot on this camera, it's got to impress me. And unfortunately, even giving it the best chance for success, shooting with Cooke lenses, Cooke S4s, I wasn't wowed by it. I'm sure in full frame with all the open gate, there are big things there, but personally, it's not any of this is my opinion, or at least my taste. Now the Venice 2, a bit better, color science improved, but price and performance, I was like, is it really giving me that much? And I didn't quite see it. So the Burano was announced, sold off the F55, actually sold my LT at the time, and bought the Burano, but it arrived incomplete. Big up Red for making all camera manufacturers think it's okay to ship you an incomplete camera. Variable frame rates weren't where it was supposed to be, and I came to realize that the full frame camera Sony had marketed as full frame did not have enough height on the sensor for one of the main reasons that I felt I needed a full frame camera, anamorphic. So owning the Burano for about 6-9 months, I couldn't do it. So I actually reached out to the lad I sold my LT to and talked him into selling me back my Varicam LT. So I bought back the camera that I sold. Yeah, and for the first time ever, I bought back a camera that I sold. So that's kind of why I say that camera is, for me, image-wise, cameras that I've owned personally, I mean, kind of like my baseline. So we've gone through my list of cameras, but this journey isn't just a list of cameras, it's a reflection of my values as a cinematographer. What I look for in a digital storytelling tool. I look for cameras that are a joy to operate, have intuitive ergonomics, let me shoot blind, which means that I don't have to always dig into the menu to change things, and offer beautiful log picture profiles and have great color science. In my opinion, Panasonic V-Log and RE Log C are the best log profiles of any cameras I've used. They grade easily, they feel natural. Looking at you, Sony, and your menus. And above all, I've got to trust it when I hit record. And that's how I choose cameras, and based on the history I've given, that's what's going to be influencing the next cinema camera or the cinema camera that I choose to shoot my feature film on. Hopefully, if you sit through this entire video and in the future you see me talk about camera choice, you'll understand what the background is and what's influencing those decisions. Sean from Martini Girls and Guns, please like, comment, subscribe, and let me know what was your first camera in the comments.